Tom, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Dave.
We spent most of December, if not all of December, going through the 6 precepts of the Vino Veritas Society, the 6 elements of the Declaration of Independence, and sort of how they define the American idea, how they make the American idea, all taken really straight from your book on citizenship.
Yeah, we have. I don't know if we've actually talked about this. We have this little primer, an introduction to citizenship, and it contains, well, there's an essay kind of summarizing the things we've been talking about.
Right.
It also has the text of the Declaration and the Constitution, and right after the Declaration are these 6 key ideas that come from the Declaration of Independence. And it's also an interesting thing worth commenting. It's a new year. We're in 2021.
Right.
And some things change as we move forward in time, and some things don't. And the things we're talking about, these ideas in the Declaration of Independence, these 6 precepts of the Vino Veritas Society, are unaffected by time.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that makes them both beautiful and important for us to study, as members of the Vino Veritas Society and as citizens who care about turning the United States into a real beacon of freedom, the thing it is supposed to be.
And for those people who are chapter members, whether they're Poor Richards or Guardians within the Vino Veritas Society, they've actually gotten a copy of that book.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's right.
So we spent time talking about that throughout December. We went through the 6 precepts, and today we're going to get into the virtues of good citizenship, which is an inherent part of what that is.
Right.
But before we do that, we wrapped the last 20 minutes or so last week on December 31st.
Last year.
I hope
2020 was long, man.
I hope that means that things are changed. So anyway, we spent the last 20 minutes or so talking about the mutual civic trust that we have to have in each other for revolution to be a possibility.
And really for free society. I mean,
right.
If you're going to live freely, when you think about that idea of mutual civic trust, citizens in general, right? And we're not talking about being naive and stupid. You don't walk down the street with your bank account number tattooed on your forehead, right? But in general, it's a live and let live attitude. I'm going to live my life and run my household, run my business, raise my kids the way I want to, and I trust that you're going to do the same. And for the most part, we leave each other alone in that sense. That's what mutual civic trust requires if you're going to have a free society, because the alternative is something like a total police state where there are cameras and guards and cops and everybody's being monitored. When I think of a police state, I think of Orwell's 1984,
sure.
where there are monitor screens, right? And they can see you and they can hear you in every room. There literally is no such thing as privacy in 1984. Right. There are the tiny little parts, the lead character where he finds that he can get away from, out of the view of the monitors.
The field where he'd go have picnics.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But there's basically no privacy. And we don't want that. We don't want that kind of totality, even though I would argue we're heading down that path. We want to live with a very limited government presence in our life. The touch of government should rarely ever be felt by most citizens, because most of us should be busy living our lives, raising our kids, running our business,
being productive,
doing all the things that free people do. And that idea of trust. And one of the things I love about that concept of trust, it is one of those concepts that everyone understands. Everyone gets it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to explain it to anybody. It cuts across all lines of gender and sex and sexual orientation and skin color and religion. It doesn't matter who you're talking to.
Right.
They understand why trust is important. No one wants to be lied to. No one wants to be cheated on, right? No.
Stolen from.
Yeah. Everybody immediately gets why trust is important.
It's basic harm, right? Nobody wants to be harmed. Whether that's physically, emotionally, financially, in any way, shape, or form, they don't want to be harmed by somebody else.
You can tell someone, and again, it doesn't matter who you're talking with. You say, think of a scenario where someone really important to you, a really close friend, a family member, a spouse, someone who really matters to you and you love them, and they betray you. They betray your trust. They violate the trust that you granted them. What's that like? Everybody knows. Everybody in the entire universe knows that really sucks. That's a terrible thing. Nobody wants that. They want the opposite. So that idea of trust is a wonderful entry point into a discussion of the politics of freedom,
right?
Because everyone agrees on the premise. Trust is important. Betraying trust is bad. And that concept of trust, it formed the foundation. If you think of all of our laws that are created resting upon some kind of big slab of marble or something, that slab of marble, that foundation was trust. There are basically two forms of laws that we used to have under the Constitution. There was criminal law and there was civil law.
Right.
And both forms of law, criminal law is when if you violate the criminal law, you're violating someone else's rights in the sense of, assault, theft, murder, rape, things like that. The civil law is if someone causes damage to you somehow. Maybe they don't even know it. Their tree falls over and smashes your fence.
It doesn't have to be intentional.
Does not have to be intentional.
It's just
it can be, but it doesn't have to be. You've caused harm somehow to someone else.
Right.
They have a river running through their field and you dam the whole thing up and now they can't get any water and all their crops and animals die.
Right.
You've caused some damage. That's civil law, and that allows citizens to sue each other personally to regain or recover somehow from the damage that was done.
Sure.
But the important thing here about this whole framework of law, criminal and civil, those forms of law basically had two premises. One premise was freedom, and that's the trust. We trust each other to live freely. You and I are fellow citizens. I trust you, Dave, to go live as you want to live, and you trust me to go live as I want to live. Unless and until we hurt somebody or do something wrong, then the law has something to say.
Right.
But the premise is make your own choices, use your property however you want, be free, live freely. There's one premise. And the other premise was, and this is really key, under both forms of law, criminal and civil, someone else has to prove, has to demonstrate that you've done something wrong, that you've harmed someone, that you've violated someone else's rights. In the case of criminal law, it's the government. If the government's going to charge you with a crime, only the government can charge you with a crime.
Sure.
As an individual citizen, we can't charge each other with murder or assault or battery or any of those things. Only government can. And then the burden is on government. It has to prove in a court of law, typically beyond a reasonable doubt is the legal threshold, that the accused actually committed the crime that was alleged. The accused does not have to prove anything. In fact, in many criminal cases, the accused will just be quiet, won't testify at all because the accused doesn't have to do that. The burden is on government. In the case of civil law, if I sue you and I say you violated a contract or you caused damage to my house or whatever it is, I have to demonstrate that you've actually done some kind of harm to me. What we have created over the past century is this gigantic body of these things called regulations. And regulations are strikingly different from law.
Before we get into regulations, let's circle that back. What you just said about criminal and civil law, that's proper purpose of government.
That's right.
Proper purpose of government, the fourth precept of the Vino Veritas Society, says that we recognize that we need a government and we need some type of law enforcement body because there will be bad actors. We would like everybody to be the perfectly good, virtuous citizen that we advocate for. And we'll talk about what that means. But there will always be bad actors. We recognize that there will be bad actors. There's a reason you don't walk down the street with your bank account tattooed on your forehead, because even if 99 people that you walk past say, oh, that's pretty dumb. You're walking around. Somebody's going to do something. There is that one person who's going to do something about it. So this whole, both criminal and civil code, government either acting to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed a criminal violation, or being the judge between two civil litigants.
Right.
That's the proper purpose of government.
Yeah, because the ultimate goal in both cases is try to make sure that people are secure,
Right.
as secure as practically possible, right? In a regime of freedom, some people, as you're saying, they're going to be bad actors and they're going to do some bad things. But to the degree that's practical, government should try to make sure that people are secure in their person and their property. And if they get damaged, that they're the legal term is they're made whole. They're somehow compensated, or their house is rebuilt if it was damaged, whatever the harm was done.
Sure.
You're absolutely right. Those forms of law are the means by which government achieves its or pursues its proper end,
Right.
the protection of individual natural rights, the protection of persons and private property. And I want our members, I want our listeners to really think this through and contrast that entire edifice of law and government and protecting individual rights with what we have today. Because what we have today it's a very different thing. It's a very problematic thing. It's a very dangerous thing. We now have millions of pages of regulations at all levels of government.
Mm-hmm.
And regulations they're not laws, they're not passed by Congress, they're not signed by a president, but they have the force of law. They are binding on you as a citizen. If let's pick one, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, I think that's the name of it.
Something.
They issue a regulation that tells you how you must run your business, something you have to do within your business. You have to do it. If you don't, they can come and prosecute you as if you broke a law, when what you've broken is, in fact, a regulation that was issued by this unelected regulatory agency. And it gets even worse. Not only are regulations not laws that are treated as if they're laws, which in itself is hugely problematic, because it means when regulations are bad, when regulations are arbitrary, when they are constrictive, restrictive, damaging to liberty, damaging to businesses, most Americans don't know what to do at the next election cycle, who to vote for
Sure.
or vote against, because these regulations are all coming from unelected bureaucrats. If your problem, if OSHA or the EPA or the IRS is harassing you and they're about to shut down your business and it's going to destroy your life, and an election is coming up, which candidate should you vote for president or for Congress or for any other race? For most people, it's not clear because it's not clear what the relationship is between those elected offices and these unelected agencies.
And let's remind everybody that those agencies are like that by design, right? This goes back to Woodrow Wilson's permanent government.
Yes.
Right? This is the permanent government. The government has to manage the lives of all people. The progressive idea of you are incapable of making good decisions for yourself. You are going to make decisions that intentionally harm as many other people as possible to your own end. And therefore, the government needs to run your life. And as a result, we need a permanent government that even if Donald Trump were to get elected in 2016, he can't make things so free that people could start harming each other.
He can do a little bit. A president today, the truth is, and then Trump did some of this to his credit. Mm-hmm. A president can try to cut back some regulations, but he can't eliminate them all. Right. He can't. He simply doesn't have the legal authority to do that. He certainly can't abolish any of these regulatory agencies, because all of them were created by Congress really to be insulated, to be independent to a large measure from the elected bodies. And think about what that means. That phrase, there's a whole body of literature among political scientists on independent regulatory agencies. That first word, that first adjective, independent. They're independent from the elected parts of our government, which means they're independent from us. They're independent from the American people because we vote. How do we control our government typically? Short of revolution, right? In the normal, ordinary process of things, we control our government through elections. We watch what our government does, and we reward people by re-electing them, and we punish people by booting them out of office and electing someone else. So when we create these independent agencies, what we're really saying is they should be independent from our control. They're beyond our control, even though they're controlling us.
Right.
Which is why I say this is the modern regulatory state. All these regulatory agencies combined, it's highly problematic. It's a great danger. In fact, I would argue it's the greatest danger that there is in the United States today. And then you look at how they operate, how they work. They work primarily by issuing and enforcing regulations.
Sure.
And they do it all. They issue the regulations. They enforce the regulations. If there's ever a question whether you actually violated their regulation or not, they judge.
Right.
They sit in judgment whether you violated their regulation. They even sit, the Supreme Court has gone so far, the United States Supreme Court has gone so far in a famous case, Chevron versus the United States, the Supreme Court said, we on the court, we don't know what all these regulations mean. And therefore, if there's ever a question, when a regulatory agency is enforcing its own regulation, if there's a question about what the regulation means, we're going to defer to the regulatory agency. They're the experts. They're the ones who created the regulation, so we'll ask them what these things mean. So they're exercising all three political powers, the executive, the legislative, the judicial power. And these regulations are the exact opposite of what traditional law was. We said before, traditional law, criminal and civil, has two premises. Freedom, which is the trust. We trust each other to live freely. And the burden of proof is on someone else. You're going to accuse someone of doing something, right. You have to prove it. If you want to sue somebody in the civil court, you have to demonstrate that they did something wrong. If you're in government, you want to charge someone with a crime, you have to prove that they committed assault or rape or murder or whatever the crime is you're charging them with. Regulations, if we go back to that idea of a big foundation, big slab of marble, the foundation of regulations is distrust,
right?
Suspicion. Because regulations on the one hand say, we're not going to wait, we're not going to we're not going to allow you to be free and make your own choices and wait until you hurt someone and then sue you. Regulations say, we're going to command what you do before you've ever hurt anybody. Most businesses have to start complying with regulations before they even open their door. They haven't served a customer yet, and yet they have to be in compliance in a number of ways. And this is the other thing. The burden of proof. Under civil law, the burden of proof is whoever is suing. Under criminal law, the burden of proof is on the government to prove. With regulations, the burden is on you as a citizen to prove your own innocence. You have to prove, the presumption, in other words, is you are presumed guilty until you prove that you are innocent. And you don't prove your innocence once or twice or thrice. Proving your innocence is an ongoing, endless process called compliance.
Right.
Being in compliance is you proving that you're innocent. And if there's ever a moment where you're not in compliance, you have not proved you're innocent, instantly that triggers a verdict of you're guilty of something. You must have hurt somebody. You're not in compliance. We're going to fine you. We might shut your business down. We can even put you in prison simply because you were not in compliance. You didn't prove your innocence. And that weight, that burden of regulation weighs on us today far, it's a much heavier weight than traditional laws.
Well, it's the exact opposite of mutual civic trust.
Yes.
It is foundational mistrust between government regulators and the people that they claim to have oversight, that they claim to have legal oversight over.
And here I want to offer a little tool, a little rhetorical tool. When our members are talking with other people and you're engaged with some maybe left-leaning, progressive-leaning, or just sort of apolitical Americans who don't think about this, and they say, we really need more regulations. We need more regulations on that business or that industry over there. A good question to ask people is say, I tend to trust my fellow citizens. Why are you so suspicious of them? Why are you so suspicious? Because your demand for regulation is coming from a place of suspicion.
And what's amazing to me about that is the government has turned that into a business. The government has turned that into a revenue stream for them. And we've made this comment before. It's a mafia type mentality.
Yeah.
It's you have to pay us. We're going to make sure nobody messes with you. You shouldn't trust your fellow citizens. We don't trust your fellow citizens. You definitely shouldn't. And we're going to take care of you, and we're going to make sure that you're going to be taken care of. You just have to pay us for that right. It's always bothered me that in order to start a business in America under the progressive model, the very first check you have to cut, before you do anything else, the very first check you have to cut is to the government.
Yep.
Just to say, okay, I'm naming a business. I have a business now and I'm going to name it and here's my $10, $20, $100 depending on the state. It varies by state. It's why so many companies are based in Delaware, Texas, Florida, Arizona versus California or New York. It's why some companies base themselves overseas or in the Caribbean.
You got to register.
You have to register and you have to get a tax ID number.
Yeah.
And you can't operate a business until you've paid the government first.
Well, Dave, if you didn't have a tax ID number, God forbid, you might go out and engage in some productivity and exchanges and not pay part of it to the government.
And then if you want to be in compliance, you have to continue to pay to stay in compliance. So for example, if we were to move offices for the Vino Veritas Society tomorrow, we don't get to just go to the Secretary of State and say, hey, we're trying to be good compliant citizens. Here's our new address. It's here's our new address and here's the $25 it costs us for you to take the time to register it.
Right.
It's just absurd.
Well, it's not like they have any funds to work with. It's not like they tax us. Oh, wait, they do tax us. They have lots of money already.
That's why they want to raise taxes to 90% because they keep growing and it takes so many people. The person's getting paid a lot more than the $25 it takes for the time to go through and update their systems apparently or their servers or whatever the costs are. And as they keep raising their costs and it keeps getting more and more expensive, Joe Biden's now proposing somewhere around a $3 trillion or $4 trillion annual budget, just to keep the country operating. So they have to get money somewhere, and that money comes by building distrust among Americans.
You're absolutely right that fueling distrust really sparks revenue coming into government coffers. Right. And I want to pull on the string just a little bit more before we move on to other subjects. This whole realm of trust versus distrust and what that means for law versus regulation, how government looks at citizens, how citizens look at their government. All of this can be understood in very personal ways. This does not require charts and graphs and a bunch of numbers and a bunch of data. As I said before, this concept of trust is something that's meaningful in a personal way. It's at the heart of a subject that modern Americans of all stripes are fascinated with, in a way almost obsessed with, relationships. Modern Americans really, really care about their relationships. Younger generations, millennials right now, carve out work arrangements in ways that allows them to facilitate their own personal relationships. I mean, it's a great priority. We have created by demand an army of counselors and therapists to help us with our relationships. That's how important it is. And if you ask just ordinary people in the United States about relationships, are relationships important to you? And they'll say, yeah, sure, some are. Well, of those relationships that are important, what's the most important thing about that relationship? What strengthens it or kills it? They're going to come to the subject of trust. It doesn't matter if it's a business relationship, a romantic relationship, a friendship, relationships within families. You got to be able to trust them. And so we can use this theme to kind of pluck emotional chords. If we frame the problem of big, expensive, unconstitutional regulatory government in terms of how much it costs or how many regulations or how many businesses shut down. A lot of people, their eyes just glaze over. They don't care about that data. But if you put it in terms of, if you say, I don't want to live as the kind of person who's distrusting, who's suspicious of everyone around me, you pique the interest of a lot of people who are not interested in politics. And here's another thing about this. To live, it's a real challenge, to live as a trusting person. And I mean this both in the civic sense as a citizen and even in the personal realm. Trust, there's a phrase a lot of people throw out there about earning someone's trust. And the truth is you can't. You cannot earn someone's trust. You can do anything you want. You can try as hard as you want. You can't make someone trust you. Even if you deserve to be, even if you are trustworthy, you can't make someone else trust you. In the end, trust is a gift that we each have.
Right.
It doesn't require money. It doesn't require. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor. It doesn't matter what color skin you have. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. Trust is something we each have, and we can give it as a gift if we choose. And it takes some courage to actually trust others, because the moment you give that gift, that trust you've given is connected to your emotional well-being. If they betray your trust, it hurts. It stings. Nobody likes that.
Right.
And so you got to have the courage, the strength to let yourself be a little vulnerable, right? To actually trust someone. The opposite way of living is to be so scared, so fearful, so defensive that you never trust anybody. You never actually give that trust. Now, you might feel more secure. You might think, oh, nobody can hurt me because I don't trust anybody. It's a pretty miserable, lonely way of living.
Think about that whole picture you just painted. I mean, let's really analyze that for a minute. We have talked about, and you even just brought it up, there is this now army of psychologists and psychiatrists out there, therapists, counselors, life coaches, all of these things. And there's extensive depression in the world, especially amongst younger people. There's we've talked about the social pathologies of teen suicide, of school shootings, of all of these domestic violence, all of these things. And at their core, we're all trying to find our way how to deal with them and how to work our way past them. And at the core of that whole thing, the government's causing it. And nobody wants to admit it. How is the government causing it? Because they're telling everybody, you can't trust your friends, you can't trust your family, you can't trust your neighbors. They're doing it through television, they're doing it through policy, they're doing it through commentary, they're doing it through things that became normal sayings, normal things that people would just say on a day-to-day basis that they thought were fun, were funny, were maybe even a little bit true, and they were just hugely damaging to society as a whole. And now there are these areas where we actually believe in certain things that are actually what's causing all of these social pathologies. And I'll give you the perfect example. I was watching a football game over the weekend, one of the college football bowl games, and the announcer made a comment that I think we all heard a million times growing up, and at least I did, and I don't know if you did, but I, especially in sports, but I've heard it in a lot of other scenarios, and that is, you didn't do anything wrong if you don't get caught.
Yeah, right.
Right? It encourages this idea of, do whatever you got to do and go be somebody that nobody should trust, because if you don't get caught, it's okay.
Yeah.
And that leads people to try to cheat on their taxes, try to cheat on their wives, try to cheat on their husbands, try to cheat on their whatever. They find every avenue.
Try to cheat in the football game.
Try to cheat in the football game. They try to find every opportunity they can to cheat.
Yeah.
Because they think if I get caught once out of 100 times, those 99 times are wins. Yeah. And that mentality is what's really taken us to the point of saying, I can do whatever I want, and if somebody gets hurt, it's not my problem because nobody caught me.
I'm glad you brought that up. I just want to point to, we don't have time to go into any depth. I want to point to, and maybe this will be the subject of a toolbox video we'll do later. That whole idea, that whole premise of do any rotten, terrible, unjust thing you can as long as you don't get caught.
Right.
It didn't happen. That is the great challenge put to Socrates in the most famous book of philosophy in history, Plato's Republic.
Right.
Socrates is surrounded by some friends and others, and they're peppering him with questions. And they get to this topic of justice. What is justice? Why is it good? And they're putting the burden on Socrates to defend these things. And Socrates is trying to explain why justice, doing justice, acting justly, is superior to injustice. Even though, and he acknowledges, injustice has some short-term advantages. If you want some money, the quickest way to get some money is to go rob a bank. You're stealing from somebody, but you can get a lot of money really fast. And the interlocutors sitting around Socrates, Glaucon, Adimantus, there's an ancient myth of the ring of Gyges. The ring of Gyges is this mythical ring. If you put it on, you become invisible. No one can see you. And so they say, Socrates, they challenge him. If someone could get if the ring of Gyges was real, you could put it on, no one could see you. Wouldn't the best thing to do would be to get invisible, become invisible, go do all the injustice you want, take everything you want to take, rape all the women you want to rape, do whatever you want to do, and then when you take the ring off, live your life in a way that you earn a reputation as a good man. You have the reputation of justice, but you actually do great injustice. And Socrates comes back and makes an argument, and this is why we have to set this aside for another time to parse through whether his argument is compelling. He still defends that living justly is still superior, even if you can act unjustly and get away with it and have no one see you. And the whole thing comes around to this notion of mutual civic trust as the foundation of a free society. And one of the points I want to make for our listeners, it means that to live freely among other free people, right? Where it's not just you living freely, you recognize everyone else's right to freedom, and it's a live and let live. That takes some inner strength. That takes some courage, because it's kind of scary, right? Saying, okay, the people around me, I just know they're going to live freely. And if they do something wrong, then there's some action to take. But until they do anything wrong, I'm not going to control them. I'm not going to try to control them. I'm just going to trust that they're going to run their business and raise their kids and live their life the way they want, and I'm going to do the same. That takes some real strength. That takes some real courage. In the same way that a truly loving relationship takes some real courage, right? You got to have the strength to say, I actually trust this person. I'm not going to try to control this person all the time, just going to trust them and love them. To live like a progressive, to say, let's control everyone. Let's regulate everyone. I'm suspicious of them. I don't trust the guy who started a new restaurant to just serve us good food. I want to control and regulate every step of his business. It's a small-souled way of living. It's living in fear. It's living as a coward. It's a very scared way of living. It's not very noble. It's not very admirable. And so here, we've wandered into these deeply personal and moral qualities of freedom that are far removed from graphs and charts of data. And we can talk about the graphs and charts of data and all the problems of progressivism, but I kind of like this space of the trust and all the moral qualities that the moral dimensions of this conversation, because I think it relates to a lot of ordinary Americans.
Not even just Americans. I think a lot of human beings are looking for these answers. They're looking for, how do I live a life that makes me happy and fulfilling? And to do that, it does require trust. It requires people to be there for each other. It requires people to make good decisions and to take care of one another by choice, not by force. It requires that people restrain themselves from hurting other people. It requires people to say, you don't have to take care of me. I can rely on myself. And if you choose to take care of me, if you choose to do something for me, it's out of the goodness of your heart, and it will be appreciated and it will be reciprocated.
Chances are a large number of our listeners right now listening to this podcast have been in a bad, unhealthy, maybe abusive relationship at one point or another. Chances are pretty high. A lot of people have experienced that. And whichever end you're on, if you're in some kind of unhealthy, toxic relationship of any kind, everyone knows it really sucks. If you're the one being abused, it really sucks in all kinds of ways. And the truth is, life sucks for the abuser too. Because the one who's doing the abusing is constantly suspicious, constantly scared of being hurt. That's why the abuser wants to control the other person. It's a miserable way of living. It's not a good life. And in a way, you could really distill down the difference between freedom and progressivism is the difference between living as a trusting, strong, courageous human being versus living as a scared, controlling, power-seeking human being.
Right. So this whole thing, you and I have for now 5 months, 6 months as we've been doing this. This is our 32nd podcast. So that puts us at about 8 months worth of this. Is that right? No.
Yeah. I'm going to do a quick shout out to we have a new listener named Tanner who's burning through our podcast right now. He's going to catch up to us pretty quickly.
So as we've been going through this, you and I have often talked, should we rename the podcast? Should we keep it as the Vino Veritas Society podcast, or should we rename it? And we've always said, as we start to add more, we'll probably name it. And for the first time, it's sort of come full circle to me that all of these ideas, I don't care if you're talking about data from Milton Friedman about how to spend money, or you're talking about the moral quandaries of trust. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, all of these ideas are about living a good life, living a happy, healthy life. And it's really interesting to me to think about how many people out there are spending hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars a month, a year, looking for answers. Yeah. And at their core, and what most counselors and life coaches and everybody else is going to tell you, you have to open yourself up. You have to be a little vulnerable. You have to trust people, and you have to be trustworthy. Yep. And if you can do those things, you're going to lead a happier life. And it's just kind of one of those amazing things that as you really think about how the world has changed over the last 50, 60, 70 years, I have a cousin who first thing he always likes to ask when we start debating politics, he says, well, would you rather live 50 years ago or today? And he thinks about all of the wonderful innovation and computers and phones and all of the gadgets and toys and new things that have come about. And those are all wonderful. And I love that stuff. And we get to sit in a studio with cameras and all of this stuff because of that. And at the same time, there was a time you could leave your front door unlocked.
Yep.
There was a time, even 5-10 years ago, that my parents would leave their front door open. They would be home, but they would leave their front door open. Their garage door would usually stay open. Neighbors would come knock, say hi, come hang out. And that openness was an invitation in.
Well, I've got my own personal story. I grew up in a little town in Kansas.
Right.
My parents have lived at the same address since I was I think we moved into that house when I was in 4th or 5th grade. I was a little kid. I'm now 51 years old. Not only have I never had a key to that house, so the entire time I was growing up, I never had a house key. I've never seen one. I have never seen a key to their house. If they have a key, I don't even know if they know where it is. Our doors were always unlocked. Even if we left for a while, my mom would worry that maybe a neighbor is making cookies and runs out of sugar. How is the neighbor going to get into our house and get some extra sugar if the doors are locked? Like, that was the worst thing in the world to lock the doors.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of life.
Because you trusted people, and that was the foundation of relationships.
Yeah.
And people didn't take advantage of those things. And if we're going to salvage better lives, or if we're going to eliminate these social pathologies, give me one example of one of these mass shooters,
right,
who you believed actually could trusted and believed and thought, those people in there, if they actually got to know me, they would really like me, and I would really like them, and we would be friends.
Right. Who actually had meaningful, important relationships because they allowed themselves to be vulnerable. I suspect I'm gonna float a hypothesis here and see what you think about it. Part of the progressive movement over the past century has been this growing notion that no one should suffer anything ever in any way. You should never suffer a financial hardship. That's the whole premise for Social Security, right? Government's going to make sure you always have this flow of revenue coming to pay your bills, because you should never have to suffer any kind of economic hardship for any reason. You should never suffer any kind of physical malady. It's why it's the progressive claim for universal health care, right? Single provider, government managed health care to make sure everybody can have access to medicines and medical technology. No suffering of any kind. And in the realm of real human relationships of any kind, business, family, romantic, you name it, friendships, when you open yourself up, when you give trust to others, you acknowledge their right to live freely and make their choices, you do let yourself become vulnerable. And chances are you're going to get hurt. Somewhere along the way, somebody's going to betray your trust. And it stings. It's and I don't mean to dismiss it lightly. It can be a really life-altering thing, that kind of event. And along comes progressivism and says, even in that realm, you shouldn't ever be hurt by fellow citizens betraying your trust. Therefore, we progressives, we're going to control them. We're going to regulate every aspect of their lives so that they can't hurt you. And I think there are a lot of Americans today who look at that and say, okay, that sounds like a great deal. But what do you give up? What you give up is the opportunity to actually extend genuine trust to someone.
To have an actual relationship with somebody.
If everything I do is controlled and regulated, you can't actually have a real relationship with me, because every choice I make, I'm not making. Somebody else, some regulator made for me. That's right. It means we're basically living out scripts, roles that have been dictated by someone else. It's not a very human or humane way of living.
And they're trying to define exactly what the relationship should look like between all people. And they dismiss you or they defame you if you want a relationship that is different than what they believe is the perfect relationship. Yeah. We have a lot of people involved in Vino Veritas Society, or that you and I know personally, who take great pride in being a mom, being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And that has become a socially unacceptable standpoint, as opposed to something of value. Another thing that I've kind of been thinking as we're talking about this that I think is interesting is the number of people in the public sphere, in the public eye, that are both sowing distrust among people and at the same time saying, but trust us.
Yeah.
You have the media as the perfect example. The media, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, don't trust anybody. You can't trust Donald Trump. You can't trust Republicans. You can't trust your neighbor. You can't trust all of these people.
Certainly can't trust business owners.
Right. You can't trust business owner or anybody who's interested in making a profit.
Right.
They're all out to harm you.
Yes.
But trust us, because we're here to tell you that you can't trust them.
Right.
And anybody who's telling you you can't trust other people is the good guy. It's almost another form of wokeism, right? Anybody who's telling you that you can't trust anybody else, you should trust.
Right.
The government is the same way. The government constantly says, you can't trust anybody out there. Human beings are not people to be trusted.
Yep.
But trust us. Because once we're in government, we have the power of government, and therefore we're no longer human beings.
Well, in fact, so here we have come full circle. The whole model, in our last podcast, we used the word Freedomtrust, that the United States was founded as a kind of freedom trust, a trust in freedom, a trust in each other to be free. And the moral dimension there of the founding was, we ordinary citizens trust each other to a large degree. We extend mutual civic trust to each other, live and let live attitude. We do not trust those in government precisely because they exercise the monopoly on legalized power, legalized force. So we're going to bind them down with the chains of our Constitution. We're going to say to you in government, you're only going to exercise these few powers that we've written down in our Constitution. And we didn't really care what they thought of us. Who cares? We're the principals. You're our agents. You're our servants. You're going to do what we tell you to do. We don't really care what you think of us. Versus the progressive model. Every aspect of that is different. The progressive model is citizens should not trust each other. Great distrust, great suspicion. Your fellow citizens are out to hurt you. You should trust government. They're going to give us subsidies. They're going to regulate and keep us safe and control us. Trust government. But those in government also don't trust the citizens.
Right.
That's why they're regulating and controlling. And we have moved a long, long way from this model based on trust in each other, distrust towards government, down towards this model of distrusting each other and putting all of our trust in government, which is why we are in a precarious and dangerous and really unprecedented situation today in all of American history.
So let's take that, and we're coming up on a time to wrap this up, and I want to pick this up next week.
Okay.
The Vino Veritas Society, it is really founded on this idea of mutual civic trust, the entire thing. And I want everybody to realize that this isn't about just good government or holding the government accountable. This is about good relationships. This is about trusting in one another. This is about what a good free country actually looks like and how great that country can be, how amazing the relationships and the life that people can have when they're free from the constraints of government and having to be accountable to somebody that they never even chose to be in a relationship with, the bureaucrat.
A good, healthy United States of America, a free, prospering, healthy United States of America is analogous to, it's not synonymous, it's not the exact same thing, but it's similar to a good, healthy, prosperous, functioning relationship. Mm-hmm. If we have a friendship and I consistently hurt you, I steal from you, I attack you, I spread lies about you, I just do all kinds of terrible things, our relationship is either not going to, it's not going to be very good, it probably won't last very long, because for a relationship to thrive, there are certain qualities, there are certain virtues that each of us as friends, we have to exercise to some degree for this relationship to survive, especially to thrive. Same thing with freedom.
Right.
If we want a free society to survive and to thrive and prosper, then citizens have to exercise certain kinds of civic virtues so that they are trustworthy,
right,
so that their fellow citizens are not looking to control and regulate every aspect of their life. And so this whole model here of mutual civic trust for each other as citizens, distrust and very limited power for those in government, it only works if we have citizens who are virtuous. And that's going to require a discussion of what those virtues are.
Right. When people ask us what does success look like for the Vino Veritas Society, we often comment that one of the points of success, one of the things that we can point to say we've been successful, is a reduction in the regulatory state, in the bureaucracy. Let's make sure people understand why that's success. It's not success because we just don't like bureaucrats, which we don't. I mean, we're not going to pretend that, it's we like you, but we just want you to go away.
Right.
We don't like bureaucrats. But why don't we like them? Because bureaucrats are built to sow distrust among people.
Well, let's be real clear. I want to make sure no one misunderstands. When you say built, it's not them personally, genetically or biologically.
Right.
They're surrounded by incentives.
Bureaucracies instead. How about this?
Yeah.
Bureaucracies are designed to sow distrust.
Yes.
Bureaucracies are designed to sow distrust among the people because it is the only way that they survive. It's the way the permanent government survives. And our goal is an America where people trust each other again. Our goal is an America where the whole basis of our founding is understood to be this idea of mutual civic trust, where neighbors start having relationships again, where we don't need armies of life coaches and counselors and psychologists and all of these things
and regulators
to make people feel like I'm safe leaving my house.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to state it this way: there are some good conservative and constitutionalists and libertarian organizations out there who do some good work explaining all that's wrong with these mountains of regulations, and they work to, their goal is to have fewer regulations, and we agree with them on that. We could almost state as our goal the flip side of the coin. Another way to state the same goal, fewer regulations, means in America where more citizens trust each other more.
Right.
They feel safer just living among other free citizens, and they trust each other more. A regime of trusting fellow citizens is a regime where there aren't many regulations.
Right. And they trust each other because they are intending to be good to one another, be virtuous people. And let's wrap by just kind of mentioning those four virtues that this whole thing is founded upon. In order to have freedom, in order to trust one another, and in order to do away with the bureaucracies and to have trustworthiness, the founders have talked about what makes a good virtuous citizen, and you boiled those down to really four things: self-restraint,
Yep.
self-assertion,
Yep.
self-reliance, and civic knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think next week we'll get into what each of those means and why they're important, but everybody should let those marinate. Well, self-restraint, this idea of even if your front door is open or your bank account is tattooed on your forehead, I probably shouldn't go and steal from you because I want you to trust me, and I want to be able to trust you.
Right.
And there might be bad actors out there, and if there's bad actors, I need to assert myself into that situation and help out. I need to be a good partner to my friends, my family, my community, my neighbors. I need to be aware of what's going on around me. Civic knowledge, just knowing these ideas and understanding that if I actually understand this stuff, I don't need government.
Right.
We can all be good. And then self-reliance is fairly self-explanatory. This idea of just being able to rely on yourself.
You can't be very free if you're dependent on someone else.
Right. If you need the government to take care of you, if you can't walk out your door feeling like you can be a safe, productive person that's not going to harm somebody else, or you need somebody else to take care of you to make sure that you are a good person,
right,
it's not going to work out very well for you.
A life of dependency is not a life of freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Until then, we'll continue to guard the precepts of the Declaration of Independence and a free society.
No sumos custodes.
No sumos custodes. We are the guardians.